Well, Shabbat Shalom. I just want to welcome everyone to the Sabbath Day conference call. And this is Barbara serving as your host today. And Brother Pete is here as your co-host.
I'm so glad y'all were able to join us today.
Well, Brother Pete, our title today is The Biblical Warning Concerning Chiun and Remphan. And it's all about worship. So long before the rise of Christianity, before the Roman Empire, and before the modern names assigned to the days of the week, Scripture recorded a solemn warning as touched on in the intro that I just read regarding the adoption of foreign systems of worship. The prophet Amos declared in Amos 5:26, "But you have borne the tabernacle of your Molech and Chiun your images, the star of your God, which you made to yourselves." And then more than 7 centuries later, Stephen stood before the Sanhedrin shortly before his martyrdom and quoted the same warning from Acts 7:43.
Yea, you look up to the tabernacle of Molech and the star of your God Rephaim, figures which you made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon.
At first glance, these passages appear obscure. Many readers pass over the names Molech, Chiun, Remphan without giving them much thought. Yet, Stephen's decision to revisit this warning is significant. Standing before the religious leaders of his day, he was not merely recounting history, he was reminding them that Israel had repeatedly fallen into the temptation of blending the worship of Yah with religious systems borrowed from surrounding nations. And the warning centers upon 2 distinct elements. The first is Molech, a deity associated with some of the most detestable forms of pagan worship. The second is described as the star of your God, identifies as Chiun in the Hebrew text and Remphan in the Greek account preserved in Acts. So the fact that both passages connect these names with a star immediately directs our attention toward the worship of heavenly hosts. And this distinction is important. The issue was not simply the worship of carved images made of stone, wood, or metal. The warning extends to celestial worship, the veneration of heavenly bodies, and the adoption of time-keeping and religious systems associated with them. Throughout Scripture, Yah consistently forbids his people from lifting their eyes to heaven in order to worship the sun, moon, and stars, or any of the part of hosts of heaven. In one of these passages, most frequently cited in discussions concerning the heavenly lights, is in Deuteronomy 4:19.
At least thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun, the moon, and the stars, and even all the hosts of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them.
Many readers have understood this passage to mean that the heavenly lights possess little or no role beyond their physical existence. Yet a closer examination reveals that Moses was not condemning the Creator's appointed use of the sun, moon, and stars. Rather, he was warning against the transforming them into objects of worship. So we just did a video on this last week on Deuteronomy 4:19. So I hope that you will go and watch it. The Creator had already assigned these heavenly witnesses a sacred purpose. According to Genesis 1:14-18, they were appointed as signs for Moedim, appointed times, for days and for years. Their intended role was to reveal the Creator's order and time, not to become the focus of devotion themselves. So throughout history, many nations transformed these celestial witnesses into deities, assigning them names, personalities, powers, and systems of worship. And it is within this context that the names Chiun and Remphan emerge. Who were Chiun and Remphan? Well, the question before us, therefore, is straightforward. Who are Chiun and Remphan, and why did both Amos and Stephen consider their worship important enough to condemn? The answer leads directly into the ancient world of astral religion, planetary deities, and the historical figure most scholars identify with these names: Saturn.
At first glance, the names appear mysterious. Outside of Amos 5:26 and Acts 7:43, neither name receives extensive treatment in Scripture. The immediate question is whether Chiun and Remphan refer to these refer to two different entities, or simply two names for the same one. The overwhelming conclusion of both ancient and modern scholarship is that they represent the same celestial deity viewed through different languages and cultures. The Hebrew term Chiun, also rendered Chiun, or Chiwan, bears striking similarities to ancient Near East names associated with Saturn. Variations of the names appear in Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Arabic, and other Semitic traditions. In several of these languages, forms of Chiwan became established names for the planet Saturn itself.
The identification of Chiun with Saturn is not a modern theory. Morris Jastrow and George A. Barton, writing in the Jewish Encyclopedia, observed that Chiun, or Kiwan, was associated with the Syrian Babylonian designation for Saturn. And you can find that here. I'll leave this link below, the Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 4. The Greek translators of the Septuagint, working several centuries before the Messiah's earthly ministry, appear to have understood this connection. Rather than transliterating Chiun directly, they rendered the name as Remphan, a designation that Stephen later repeated in Acts. Although scholars continue to debate the precise linguistic pathway between the names, the association with Saturn has remained remarkably consistent. The identification becomes even more significant when the biblical text is examined carefully. Neither Amos nor Stephen merely mentions a deity. Both associate Chiun and Remphan with a star. This detail points directly toward astral religion, a form of worship in which heavenly bodies were personified, deified, and incorporated into elaborate religious systems. Such practices were widespread throughout the ancient world. Babylon associated celestial bodies with divine powers. Assyria incorporated planetary worship into state religion. Egypt blended astronomical observations with its pantheon of gods. Greece and Rome later adopted many of the same concepts, assigning planetary deities to the days of the week and embedding them within their calendars. Within this broader historical setting, Chiun and Remphan are best understood not merely as obscure names, but as represented by a much larger system of celestial worship that spread throughout the ancient world. It is this system, rather than a simple name, that Amos and Stephen condemned. The evidence, therefore, leads naturally to the next question. How did Saturn become one of the most revered celestial deities of antiquity, and how did its influence eventually become woven into the calendar still used throughout much of our world today? Why are Molech and Remphan mentioned together?
One of the most intriguing features of Amos 5:26 and Acts 7:43 is that Molech and Chiun and Remphan appear together in the same warning. This association is unlikely to be accidental. Molech was among the most notorious deities of the ancient world, becoming synonymous with the practices that Scripture repeatedly condemns, including child sacrifice. Chiun and Remphan, by contrast, are connected to the worship of a celestial power identified by many scholars with Saturn.
Though different in expression, both represent the same underlying problem: the substitution of man-made religious systems for the worship of the Creator. One centered upon earthly idols and ritual practices. The other elevated a member of the heavenly host into an object of reverence. And this explains why Stephen repeated Amos's warning before the Sanhedrin. The issue was not merely the worship of particular deities, but the adoption of foreign systems that gradually displaced the authority of Yah and obscured his appointed calendar. Thus, Molech and Remphan stand as two witnesses to the same reoccurring temptation, exchanging the worship of the Creator for the worship of created things. Saturn worship in the ancient world.
If Chiun and Remphan were indeed names associated with Saturn, then understanding Saturn's place in the ancient world becomes essential to understanding the biblical warning itself. The roots of planetary worship reach deep into antiquity. Ancient Mesopotamian civilizations carefully observed the movements of the heavenly bodies and gradually associated them with various divine powers. Over time, these associations became integrated into religious systems, state ceremonies, and calendars. What began as observation gradually evolved into reverence, devotion, and eventually worship.
Among the most influential of these systems was that of Babylon. The Babylonians developed extensive astronomical records and assigned spiritual significance to the visible planets. Saturn, the slowest moving of the commonly observed planets, came to occupy a prominent place within this celestial hierarchy. Its movements were believed to carry meaning, influence events, and reveal the intentions of the gods. As Babylonian influence spread throughout ancient Near East, so too did its celestial religion, and Assyria adopted many of the same concepts. Persia inherited the portions of the tradition. Egypt blended planetary symbolism into its own religious framework, and by the time the Greek and Roman empires, planetary deities had become deeply woven into the fabric of society. The Greeks identified Saturn with Kronos, a powerful figure in their mythology. The Romans later adopted and adapted this tradition, referring to the deity as Saturnaeus, and annual festivals known as Saturnalia were celebrated throughout the Roman world, honoring Saturn through feasting, gift-giving, and public festivities. So Saturday is Saturn's day, named after the planet Saturn, and that is a pagan god, Saturn. So yet the significance of Saturn extended beyond festivals and mythology. The deity's influence became permanently embedded within the Roman method of reckoning time. As the planetary week gained acceptance, each day was assigned to a celestial deity. Saturn was given rulership over the seventh day, which became known as Dies Saturni, the day of Saturn. And their concern was the elevation of created things into the objects of worship and the adoption of religious systems rooted in that practice. The issue, therefore, was never the planet itself. The issue was the religious significance attached to it. What the Creator established as a witness in the heavens, mankind repeatedly transformed into a deity. And this distinction becomes increasingly important as we examine how the planetary week developed and how the name of Saturn eventually became attached to the day that is now known as Saturday. How Saturn became associated with the seventh day.
Saturn was not merely a distant planet in the ancient world, but a major celestial deity within the religious system of Babylon, Greece, and Rome. This raises an important question. How did the name Saturn become attached to the seventh day of the modern week? The answer lies in the development of what historians commonly call the planetary week. Unlike the biblical calendar, which marks each day of the week with a unique lunar phase, its hours by the movement of the sun, and its years and months with the starry constellation, the planetary week assigned each day to one of the 7 visible celestial bodies recognized by the ancient world: the sun, moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. The origins of the system were generally traced to ancient Mesopotamia, where celestial bodies were associated with various deities and believed to exert influence over earthly affairs. The Greeks identified the visible planets with members of their pantheon. The Romans later adopted many of these associations, assigning each day of the week to a particular planetary deity. Thus arose such designations as the day of the sun, the day of the moon, the day of Mars, and the day of Saturn.
So the Roman designation of the seventh day was Dies Saturni, literally meaning the day of Saturn. Unlike the names of several other weekdays, which changed significantly as they passed through Germanic and English traditions, Saturn's name survived largely intact. As a result, the English word Saturday remains one of the clearest surviving witnesses to the planetary origins of the modern week. And this fact does not prove that everyone who observes Saturday is worshiping Saturn any more than using the month names January to March implies devotion to the Roman gods, Janus or Mars. Most people are entirely unaware of the historical origins of the names they use. Nevertheless, the historical connection itself is difficult to deny. The more significant question concerns the system behind the name. The planetary week was not originally established as a neutral method of counting time. It developed within cultures that associated celestial bodies with divine powers and integrated these associations into their calendars, religious observances, and civil administration. And this observation brings us back to the warnings of Amos and Stephen. Their concern was not merely the pronunciation of a name, but the adoption of religious systems rooted in concepts foreign to the worship of Yah. The issue was never whether a planet existed in the heavens. The issue was the spiritual significance and rhythm of worship that men attached to it. The question before us, therefore, is not whether Saturn gave its name to Saturday. History has already answered that. The deeper question is whether the continuous weekly cycle named after the various planets itself originated with the Creator's calendar, or whether unbroken cycling week represents a later development that gradually displaced the original biblical framework of measuring the week. How did Saturn become the seventh day?
History records that the planetary week developed within the religious traditions of the ancient world and eventually spread to Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Under the leadership of the Emperor Constantine, Rome transitioned away from the earlier Julian 8-day continuous weekly market cycle and gave official prominence to a 7-day week that cycled continuously without end. In this new Roman planetary week, the seventh day was designated Dies Saturni, the day of Saturn, a name still preserved today in the English word Saturday and recognized throughout much of the world.
So Saturn was day 1 of the week, and Constantine changed it and put Sunday as day 1 and moved Saturn down to day 7 so that there would be a seventh-day worship on Saturn Day. Did the Creator establish a planetary week? If the planetary week originated with the Creator, one would expect to find some reference to it within the biblical record. Yet from Genesis to Revelation, the scriptures never assign the names of planetary deities to the days of the week, and nor can we find evidence of a week that cycles continuously. Nowhere in the Bible do we read of the day of Saturn, the day of the Sun, the day of Mars, the day of Venus, or any of the other designations that later become common throughout the Greco-Roman world. Biblical account directs our attention to an entirely different method of reckoning time. At creation, the heavenly lights were given a specific purpose, as it says in Genesis 1:14.
And Elohim said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons," that is Moedim, "and for days and for years."
So the Hebrew word translated seasons is Moedim, H4150 in the Strong's, a term used throughout Scripture to describe appointed times, sacred assemblies, and divine appointments based upon the moon. From the very beginning, the heavenly lights were established as the Creator's witnesses of time. Notice that what is absent from the creation account, there is no mention of planetary gods. There is no assignment of weekdays to celestial deities. There is no instruction to follow a continuous planetary cycle independent of the heavenly lights. Instead, the sun, moon, and stars are presented as the Creator's appointed timekeepers.
This pattern continues throughout Scripture. The psalmist declares in Psalm 104:19, "He appointed the moon for a Moedim." Likewise, Isaiah describes a future restoration in which worship is measured from new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath. Isaiah 66:23, "And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath shall all flesh come to worship before me, says Yahweh."
So these passages do not establish every detail of the Creator's calendar. They do, however, establish a foundational principle. Scripture consistently directs attention to the heavenly lights and the Creator's appointed times rather than to a continuous sequence of planetary names inherited from later civilizations. Although this calendar is primarily lunar, its year is regulated by a 19-year astrolunar solar cycle. A regular 12-month lunar year contains approximately 354 days, making it about 11 days shorter than the solar year and about 22 days short after 2 years. And for this reason, a 13th month automatically occurs every second or third year, realigning the lunar months with the solar seasons following the established cycle of the years 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, and 19. And that's called the metatonic cycle. So the Creator's unique timepiece never gets off track.
The question, therefore, is not whether a planetary week exists. History demonstrates that it does. The question is whether the planetary week originated with the Creator or arose thousands of years later from an entirely different source. If so, generations may have unknowingly exchanged the Creator's timepiece for one of human origin, obscuring both his appointed order and the unfolding plan of salvation through which the remedy for sin is revealed.
From Genesis to Revelation, Scripture never assigns the names of planetary deities to the days of the week. Instead, the Creator directs his people to the heavenly lights he established at creation as signs, moedim, specific lunar appointed time, days, and years. The moon was appointed for his appointed times. The prophets pointed to the new moons and Sabbaths. Even Revelation concludes with celestial signs involving the sun, moon, and stars. As the woman in Revelation has the moon under her feet and the crown of 12 stars over her head in Revelation 12:1. The Sabbath question revisited.
At this point, an important clarification must be made. The purpose of this study is not to condemn sincere believers who worship on Saturday. Many faithful men and women throughout history have sought to honor the Creator according to the light available to them. The issue before us is not sincerity, but authority. The historical evidence demonstrates that the modern planetary week arose from sources outside the biblical record. It also demonstrates that the name Saturday is derived from Saturn, one of the celestial deities of ancient Babylon. Yet these facts alone do not answer the central question. The real question is how did the Creator intend his sacred Sabbath to be identified, and according to what rhythm?
Throughout Scripture, the Sabbath is never defined as the seventh day of a continuous planetary cycle. Rather, it is presented as part of a larger framework of appointed times established by the Creator himself. The same scriptures that identify the Sabbath also direct to the heavenly lights appointed for signs, moedim, specific lunar appointed times, days, and years, as it says in Genesis 1:14. This distinction is often overlooked. The debate is frequently reduced to whether one should worship on Saturday or Sunday. Yet, Scripture presents a different question altogether. Before one can identify the correct Sabbath, one must first identify the calendar upon which that Sabbath was divinely created to be established. A date cannot exist apart from the calendar that defines it. Likewise, a Sabbath cannot be identified apart from the timekeeping system upon which it rests. Therefore, if the Creator established a specific method for measuring sacred time, that method alone must consistently determine the placement of his Sabbaths and his appointed times. This brings us to the heart of the matter. If the planetary week, Sunday through Saturday, did not originate with the Creator, then by what mechanism were his Sabbaths originally established? Were they intended to function independently of the heavenly lights, as some declare, or were they inseparably connected to his trinity of lights, his celestial witnesses appointed at creation? The answer to that question lies not in Roman tradition, rabbinic tradition, or modern Christian convention, but in the testimony of Scripture itself. As we shall see, the Creator embedded multiple witnesses within His calendar system, witnesses that continue to testify to its original structure and design. Here are a few final thoughts. The heavenly lights were established at creation as signs, moedim, days, and years. The sacrificial schedule distinguishes between new moon days, Sabbath, and ordinary work days. The prophets repeatedly connect worship with the new moons and Sabbaths, while Scripture nowhere establishes a continuous planetary week governed by the names of celestial deities. This is a time of restoration.
The issue, therefore, is not whether sincere believers may worship Yahweh on Saturday or Sunday. The Creator honors every sincere heart that seeks Him in truth. The greater question is whether He is calling His people to fuller restoration of the sacred order established from the beginning, just as He called the children of Israel out of Egypt and instructed them in His ways before leading them into the promised land. If the first Israel was required to learn the Creator's appointed order as preparation for receiving their inheritance, should we not expect the same call to restoration for those preparing to enter the greater promised land yet before us?
So, leaving behind the traditions of men, the Scriptures reveal that truth is often restored progressively. Throughout history, Yah has repeatedly called His people to leave behind traditions that obscured His word and return to the foundations of His originally established. Such restorations are rarely popular, yet they have always required a willingness to follow truth wherever it leads. Today, the same invitation remains before us. The heavenly witnesses continue to declare the Creator's appointed order. The moon still marks His moedim. The Sabbath and appointed times continue to testify of the plan of salvation. And the call to worship the Creator according to His instruction remains unchanged, beaconed from the Trinity of lights. The issue before every believer is therefore a simple one. Will we determine sacred time according to the traditions of men, or according to the witnesses the Creator Himself established in the heavens? The altar you choose will determine the kingdom you inherit. The answer to that question has implications far beyond the calendar. It is a revealer of the heart. It reaches into worship, obedience, prophecy, and ultimately your preparation for the inheritance promised to the faithful. So choose you this day whom you will serve. As Joshua said in Joshua 24:15,
and if it seems evil to you to serve Yahweh, choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yahovah.
So to access more information about the Creator's calendar and the signs in the heavens that were created right in Genesis 1, that is the original calendar. It's those signs are there for us, and He gave them for us. So I invite you to go to our website, LunarSabbathDay.com, to find a lot more out about the Creator's calendar. And I thank you for being here today.